When you're alone, life can be a little rough. It makes you feel like you're 3 foot tall. When it's just you, well, times can be tough. When there's no one there to catch or fall. 3 foot tall. Like you're 3 foot tall. 3 foot tall. When there's no one there to...
Hey guys, welcome to another episode of the College Alternative Podcast. Today, I'm going to have the pleasure of talking with Mike Sather, and he's going to be talking about a lot of things, but the main three things are going to be personal and business financial literacy. This is something that we just really haven't been taught in school systems, by parents, etc. For whatever reason, and we kind of get into theories as far as why we're never taught this as kids. The second thing that we're going to be talking about, main point, is how to supplement your McDonald's cheeseburger level of education with real-world scenarios and situations. And another thing that we're going to be talking about today is the importance of controlling your emotions when it comes to business. It's really, really important. You have to make smart business decisions, and you can't be led by your emotions. Rather, you have to be led by your business smarts. It's going to be a great conversation. I'm going to learn a lot. I hope you will too. And check us out.
3 foot tall. Like you're 3 foot tall. 3 foot tall.
Waking up with the same routine, hoping and praying for sunshine. A plan that don't work out as A through Z.
Interviews with the best in their fields, teaching you how to excel in careers that don't require traditional college. You're listening to the College Alternative Podcast. Insider tips and advice, straight from the experts. And now, here is your host, James Christian.
Well, hello and welcome to the College Alternative Podcast. It is my privilege and honor to have Mike Sather on the phone here, on the line, on Skype, to talk this evening. And this guy, I've been perusing your past conversations here and on your LinkedIn, and note for everybody else out there, you probably get on LinkedIn. It'll definitely help you out for networking. But I just wanted to read something off before I really introduce you. So Mike started off with a 70K single family home and went to create over $1 million in equity. And he also was able to reach financial freedom and escape the rat race at age 34. But then 2 years later, you decided to jump right back into the rat race there and challenge yourself even more. But I'll let you introduce yourself here and kind of go over your long plethora of everything that you're involved in and have done in the past.
Well, James, thanks first of all for letting me be here. It's a passion of mine to one, be in real estate like you mentioned, but also just to be able to help and give back to people. So this is really a great opportunity. About myself, I grew up, just in a small town in Minnesota, so I'm pretty much just an average Joe person, no different than many of you may be watching this. I guess we're going to get into the subject of school a little bit and maybe why it didn't fit for me, but I knew I desired something a little bit more, and I didn't want to just do the whole exchange your time for money thing. And so eventually I did get into real estate, found kind of my path there. Prior to that, I had tried different things in school. I went to college, failed out one time, got back in, ultimately ended up finishing, but I guess I kind of went round and round before I figured out what I wanted to do. And so, like you mentioned, I started with one single family home. We can get into details on how I did that. But, and I'll do some multifamily stuff, help start an online auction company called auctionblock.com. Attempted to try some other sports related businesses with prototypes, stuff like that. So a real passion for entrepreneurship in general, and investing and learning, just a real passion for learning as well. So I think that's a key component of it that holds the glue, or is the glue that holds it all together. So
Nice. And I think it's interesting too, is just the fact that you went through life and you didn't really have a direct path, at least initially, but you kept on trying new things until you found what worked for you, and you were ultimately successful at it. which is really amazing story to really hear. So,
Yeah, that's correct. I tried different jobs, odd jobs, so it wasn't like, I didn't, I just jumped right into real estate. I worked in the fitness industry. I tried the military aspect. The military gave me a lot of great skills that I learned. So I want to touch on that just for a minute.
oh yeah, go for it.
Yeah, okay, so I'll get into that. I spent 12 years in the National Guard and did approximately 3.5 years in Afghanistan. It was a really interesting because it's very difficult to learn certain things in school. I don't knock school, but it's difficult to learn certain things out of a book, and especially things like leadership and adversity and overcoming that adversity. And I think there may be some people that end up watching this that feel like there's some adversity in their life and how do I get over that hump or whatever.
Yeah.
And maybe that gives some people an advantage, in my opinion, because they have a certain motivation because of that. And, just learning to take risks. So one of my jobs was basically clearing roadways from the IEDs, or for somebody that doesn't know what that is, improvised explosive devices. So clearing roadways of bombs and then coming home and borrowing money to buy real estate isn't, puts it into perspective what real risk is. So having those experiences really helped me. So for those of you that might be watching, kind of wondering, what are some routes? Maybe I can't afford school. I'm a pro-military person. That's always one avenue a person could go. But there's just more than one option out there, So each job I did, I tried to take something away from it. Even when I was in school, maybe some of the classes weren't for me, but I tried to figure out how can I use it in my personal life, and maybe not just how could I use it in the corporate world or for some other business. Anything else you'd like me to touch on that?
Well, no, I mean, I guess the follow-up question to that is, how did you gain the self-perspective to be able to say, hey, maybe this class isn't for me, but I can definitely take something away from it? Most people just kind of just sit through a college class and they're like, drool coming down their face. If they're not, they might be awake if it's a morning class, maybe. How did you gain that self-perspective?
Well, first of all, let me rewind that just a bit. School, I got thrust into school kind of under that old traditional thinking, or the parents kind of like, oh, you got to go get the degree, get the good grades, and get your foot in the door and work your way up the ladder, I lost sight of some goals. I was highly involved in sports probably before college, and when I had an injury, I realized I wasn't able to participate anymore, and it kind of was depressing in a way. And just as a side joke, I like to tell people, that I majored in partying and minored in drinking, so that's part of my reasons I got kicked out of school. Was I lost sight of those goals. I didn't have those athletic goals anymore, but it forced me to use my brain instead. And going back even further, I mentioned this to you before. My mom kind of made me work at a factory and kind of like, hey, if you're not going to try in school, I'm going to make you work, work hard for it. And going through that experience is what realized, hey, I got to maybe get back into school. And I ended up joining the Guard for that reason, to help fund it. I didn't want to go back to my parents and ask them for the money. And I figured out I need to do this on my own. And being independent, or that kind of thinking, it's not that my parents didn't still help me, but having that mindset of like, how can I do this on my own, and start thinking on your own, was very important. It just ended up that school wasn't the right result. I got back into school and it wasn't the right result. So, but here I found myself in school now, and I realized, well, some of these classes just aren't for me. I was still struggling with that whole GPA thing. And what I found interesting is when I switched from like athletic training over to the business world and started kind of navigating my way through the business classes and stuff, I started to find a common denominator was that I was pretty interested in entrepreneurship. I wasn't quite sure, that word was new to me kind of, and I was like, what does that really mean? And I started investigating it. And my knock against school would be that, at the time I wasn't sure what was right for me. And I felt like, geez, here I am in this cookie cutter approach system. I'm not doing so hot, and I didn't think I was dumb. But my GPA probably would have labeled me as dumb. It was pretty mediocre. I was a C student. So for those of you that are C students out there, there's hope for you.
That's this guy. Yeah.
Yeah. C's get degrees, I like to say. But if your end goal is just a degree, that's different. My end goal was not a degree, and I was starting to look, what is really my end goal? And so, here's this cookie cutter approach system. I feel like each person has the ability to learn as uniquely as their, just as the amount of fingerprints there are out there. So, yet we have the one system to try to get everybody to learn the same way. So don't feel bad if you're not doing so hot. Don't feel so bad if it doesn't feel right for you. That's how I felt. I kind of like to joke around and say that the school system to me is good for the masses, kind of like McDonald's hamburgers are good for the masses. But we all know what happens if you eat McDonald's hamburgers every single day. It's not good for your body necessarily. Not knocking McDonald's, just saying. But so what I learned is that you need to have some kind of supplement. And so I really separate. I don't know if you can see on my board behind me or not, maybe not. But I have school and education up as two separate things. And I like to ask people what their beliefs are on what school is and what their beliefs are on education. So for me, I really desired an education. So when I started putting my brain to more use instead of my body, I desired, to learn things. And I started learning about entrepreneurship. It started getting me excited about learning. So rather than, just one, the curriculum that the school system put me on, maybe, I started to get excited about things outside, and that started to become my supplement to my cheeseburgers. So now I was really feeding my brain a lot more information. I was excited about it, so I was absorbing things like a sponge. And I like to say that, one of the things that deterred me from being successful in school is I noticed kind of like this weird pursuit of the GPA. Everybody had their mind set on this GPA, and it was like a different track than I wanted to go. And I'm like, this GPA isn't going to get me where I want to go. And I just started taking note of it. It really reminded me of Pavlov's, experiment he did with a dog, and I like to share that. He'd basically have the meat dangling there for the dog, get him to salivate, and then once the dog would salivate, he'd introduce the bell, and then you would have them going at the same time, and basically the bell or the meat was able to be removed, and the dog would still salivate. And to me, it really reminded me of our school system, and that people would salivate way more than they should have over the GPA, in my opinion. And after the GPA was pulled, basically people were
what do I do now?
Just kind of trained to work for a paycheck. The GPA was swapped with a paycheck. It was kind of a shell game. And that's what I was noticing. And I was like, I don't necessarily want to work my way up this ladder. I want to build this ladder. This GPA thing isn't for me. But I knew I needed to be smarter than the average bear or increase my education somehow. And I wasn't getting it from the cheeseburgers. And so I was getting some. So back to your original question of, how did I find some kind of, I think you mentioned, how do you find some kind of interest in the classes when maybe they don't seem right for you? Or so maybe it would be in business. For me, it was business. So maybe I didn't like accounting that much, but I wanted to learn, how can I use accounting for me? How can I use it for my personal life? How can I learn some things in, say, a marketing class or something? How can I sell myself better rather than a corporate product or something like that? So if you find yourself in a college course, and you're trying to excel yourself in a different way, those are some things you could think about. There's other things to try, like, I tried network marketing businesses in college, again, to supplement what I was doing, and I gained additional experience through that, facing rejection. I like to use learn the 4 W's, some will, some won't, who cares, who's next. So I learned some sales skills and facing rejection, rebounding from that. I think that's extremely important. Anybody that wants to start their own business, whether it's, whether they want to be a construction or be in construction, start their own construction company, maybe their own plumbing company or a trade skill, or maybe it's real estate like I'm in, or maybe it's a product where they're developing a prototype, or maybe it's a new app, whatever. You're going to go through failures, and it's not whether or not you're going to fail. It's whether or not you can pick yourself up after the failure. And so I think those are important things to learn that are very difficult to learn in the school's training program.
Yeah.
So,
yeah, I mean, you mentioned before about GPA, and that's so interesting as far as some people, you're right, some people just pursue that GPA. They don't really actually try to intrinsically learn that subject.
yes.
Whereas you had that passion. I don't really care about that GPA. I really don't care at all. I'd rather learn it, absorb it, and be able to apply that in real life.
Exactly. Once I quit caring so much about that, it kind of opened up my mind more. It reduced the stress more. It wasn't so much performing for somebody else or just being good at test taking. I really wanted to, rather than memorize and regurgitate, I wanted to retain some of this information long term, commit it to habit in a way, especially on the sales side, especially on the, the finance side. I wasn't good at finance in college. Now I've become a lot better at it. So it's definitely paid dividends. And I also look at some people in college, you look at graduation, and there's so many people that quit learning after graduation, or they feel like that's they call it the commencement. And people even, that word is, I forget the exact definition of the word now, but it doesn't mean that's the end, basically, That's the start for most people. But most people see it as like, finally, school's over with. But most people associate school and education as the same thing. Realistically, your education is just beginning. And, if you can create a good foundation, supplement those cheeseburgers, like I said, and just keep learning all the time. I'm constantly learning. I think that's really key for any entrepreneur, anybody that wants to go into business for themselves. They're always going to be learning. They're always going to be making mistakes. And there's another thing in school, on that topic, that I feel like school is sometimes why it's not right for somebody that has that entrepreneurial bug, is that, school, they kind of teach you not to make mistakes. You get reprimanded for making mistakes, and they kind of teach you to work independently. And if you work with a partner, or sometimes in groups, sometimes you can get accused of cheating or plagiarism or something of that sort. Well, in the real world, I worked with a lot of partners. I worked with a lot of different people. I learned from a lot of different people. We bounce ideas off each other, and that's how the business world a lot of times works. So
yeah, it's called collaboration and networking. I mean,
yeah, exactly.
That's how you get stuff done.
Yeah, and so that was sort of my school experience. A lot of things were independent. A lot of things were, kind of sit, face the front, listen to the teacher, whereas I wanted to be up in front more. So if you get the opportunities to do presentations, things of that sort, don't be intimidated. Go up there and, feel good about taking that risk of making a fool of yourself or screwing up the presentation or whatever. I also joined some student groups. One example was got involved with the Entrepreneurship Club. We became affiliated with Students in Free Enterprise and got more opportunities to do more presentations in front of more real-world business people. And that, to me, at that age and at that level I was at the time, was really more impactful. So everything's kind of relative. So then going back to just the little classroom presentations, it seemed like this is really easy now, So definitely push yourself and get out of that comfort zone and try some things other than just classes. Or if, again, going back, some people watching this may not even have the opportunity for college or school. And again, there's other alternative things you can do. Just to push yourself and find education sources elsewhere. And I think you mentioned something you were going to ask me about, some books. I don't know if we want to get into that. I did bring some books as examples, so we can get into that later maybe.
Yeah. Now, well, you mentioned the club, and you mentioned getting exposed to certain people. Did that influence you more? Those people, that club, people you were able to talk to there, did that influence you more in your life path than, say, the professor or the courses that you took?
Oh, absolutely. There was certain professors I'm never going to knock any individual professors necessarily, but they're part of the system that I sometimes knock. But, I think a lot of professors are out to do good, and so I don't want to take anything away from them. But I really like to learn from real world people. My real mentors come from doing things in the real world, not because they have a MBA behind their name or PhD or any kind of letters. Those are pretty much meaningless to me. But the club stuff was interesting because we got to apply some of it more in the real world. Like we got to do real financial case studies. It was more motivating. I love inspiring the other people. Just actually being in the club myself was interesting because we got to sell it, and it was sort of new for where we were at. We got to sell it and increase membership, so that, you know, just right there you're using those sales skills that a lot of times aren't taught in school. So again, supplemental stuff can really help out.
Yeah, and back then, entrepreneurship wasn't in as vogue as it is now with Shark Tank and, you know, all these like guys coming up to, you know, Silicon Valley and making billions of dollars or whatever, you know. So yeah, exactly. You definitely had to sell it more.
It's very, very interesting to see more and more universities and maybe even high schools have entrepreneurial courses or programs. It's an exponentially good thing, in my opinion. I mentioned before, you know, I don't think the reason we have unemployment issues is anything really to do with a political affiliation, whether you're Democrat, Republican, Independent, whatever. It's more because we're pumping out all these cheeseburgers that, you know, are looking for jobs. And I forgot to mention that. That was one of my extracurricular activities I would do while I was in college. I was bored with what I was doing, and so I'd go around and do a little survey in my spare time, or maybe even between classes. I don't know, maybe I was skipping class, I'm not sure, but I would go ask people what they were going to do when they finished college, and there was only two answers. Number one answer, of course, is go get a job. Number two answer was go to more school. So that was really strange to me. That's the only thing that we were trained to believe. And that goes back to that school training program. So when you separate the two, you realize, hey, you can get an education anywhere. It just so happens that you get this education along the way that you went through this training program. You were trained in a specific way maybe to use that information and not necessarily for yourself. And if you want to use it for yourself, you got to be able to think a little bit outside that box. I know that's cliche, but you got to think a little bit differently. And how can I use it for myself? So going back to those classes, like I mentioned, when I started looking at accounting, when I started looking at finance, you know, rather than how can I use this, how can I go use this to work for somebody else? How can I use this to improve myself? And it's not something to be, you know, I wasn't trying to be selfish. I was just trying to like, how can I, you know, improve my own skill set, all the tools in my own tool belt to make myself more sellable. So.
Yes, and I think that's key here. You know, I mean, I think with the internet and just access to a lot more success stories like yourself and a lot more examples, I think a lot of the younger generation has definitely become easier maybe for them to approach life outside of that box and outside of that system than to stay within. So I think we're seeing that development. Yeah.
And I think people, you know, I wanted to ask people too. I was going to ask you this right at the beginning. You know, some people will catch me knocking the school system and they'll think I'm completely anti-school, but I just try to get people to think differently. I like to challenge people, and I think it's a very important thing, even if you are in school, that some of the best students are the ones who challenge their instructor, or they even challenge their own thoughts and question things. If you just always take it as face value, maybe you're not learning as much as you could. So one of my questions to people a lot of times is, if the current school system didn't exist, would you invent it? So if you would make it exactly the same, that's great. Maybe then that's the thing for you to be in school. If there's some things you would change, what would they be and why? And you know, those are questions that go through my head, and questions individuals might want to ask themselves if they wanted to try to help determine their own path. You know, if pursuing the GPA doesn't seem interesting to you, maybe another path is for you. If you're watching these videos, you're probably another path probably is for you. So I would like to say, I have another analogy I like to use. The human body is generally made up of majority water, about 60 to 70%. It's debatable. I don't have the scientific exact number because I don't memorize that well.
I'm not a scientist, yes.
But what does water like to do? Water likes to take the path of least resistance. So I don't think it's any it's not just a coincidence that that's the case, why our body has that much water in it. Generally, people will take the path of least resistance. We get into certain habits, and then we just keep following them and put ourselves on autopilot. The only thing that can change that is your brain. Your brain can shift your body to do whatever you want it to. So by investing in these supplements, to supplement the cheeseburger, you can start to take a path that isn't necessarily the path of least resistance. And for some people, that path might be to just drop out of school and do nothing at all. For other people, it might be, I got to finish school. That's a little bit harder path. And I think even a harder path yet is, not just taking the security of a job and a paycheck and stuff like that, having to create your own path. That's one of the hardest things to me. And you got to resist your temptation, maybe just to follow that secure path. For some people, it might mean, again, going that secure path, but supplementing it. So what I mean by that is taking a job so you have some sort of income, but knowing that your path isn't that route. So when you have spare time, that you invest in trying to get down that path. I have an example to share from that. I kind of touched on it before. For some people, again, it's so easy to take that path of least resistance because now you get a job and you get tired at the end of the day. You want to just come home, turn the TV on, and veg out for some people. I would highly recommend against that if that's the path, if that's the route you go and you want to take this different path. Try to get away from some of that TV stuff, maybe some of the online stuff, unplug, invest in your supplements, do a bunch of reading, invest in that path you want to go down, learn as much as you can about that path you want to go down. Maybe start to become curious about the things you don't like in the particular job you're doing. I used to hate certain things. I hated being an employee. So I never was a bad employee. I never came off that way. But when I'd go to work, I would figure out the things I didn't like or what would really irk me about the job. And so when I'd come home, what I would like to do is rather than waste my time on watching TV or something, I would go learn. I'd start investing that time. I would force myself out of that path of least resistance and try to learn something in that field. So for example, my field was real estate. So I wanted to learn everything I could about real estate. So I just picked up every real estate book I could and wanted to accelerate that time. I'm like, I really hate being an employee. One of the books I was going to recommend, Dave Ramsey has a saying that I plagiarized from him, I guess. When the pain of same is greater than the pain of change, that's when people change. So if you're quite comfortable, if you're comfortable in going after the GP, if you're comfortable just having a job, and that really makes you comfortable and that makes you happy, more power to you. If it doesn't, you got to find that pain and dig it up. Almost like you got a knife in your side. You got to keep twisting the knife to remind yourself of the pain. And I had I had one mentor or one person I really looked up to in high school that I learned from, and that was Dan Gable. He was a former coach of the Iowa Hawkeyes. And his story, I'm not going to get into the details of his story, but if you ever get an opportunity to look him up, he is extremely inspiring. And in a nutshell, what he would do is he was the head wrestling coach, and he had some amazing success. And one of the things he would do is he would teach his wrestlers to hate losing so bad. He would make them watch the videos over and over and over so they could see their loss over and over and commit it to memory in a way that they would hate it so bad that they would come to practice. And when the practices got tough, that they would push beyond their normal limits where their mind would stop them. Your mind will generally stop before your body. So that was kind of his rule. And if you just look into him a little bit, you'll see just the amazing success that they had. And it was really based on that principle. So I kind of use that similar principle in the real world. I hated being an employee so bad that when it came time to, say, practice the path I wanted to go down to, I'd put in the effort to do it. Mm-hmm. And I think a lot of people may sit and talk about it, but again, it's so easy because you want to take that path of the water, instead. So you got to shift the water. You got to force the water to go in the direction you want it to.
Yeah, but the big takeaway here probably is be comfortable in in failing, but don't be comfortable to the point where you just say, oh, whatever. Strengthen your weaknesses. Strengthen your weaknesses here. And how
Yeah,
many?
yeah, okay.
And
That's
then
a
how?
great point.
And then how many books do you, just real quick? How many books do you read, kind of annually? Do you just dive through tons of books a year?
One per month, I would say on average.
Okay.
Sometimes I'll really get on a kick and I'll read a bunch in 1 week, or sometimes I get a little ADD, if you want to call it that. I don't believe in ADD, but I believe in creative people. But sometimes I'll get on a subject and I'll start reading a whole bunch of different books at once. But you hit a topic on something, strengthen your weaknesses. So one of the things we did in business classes, I remember we do a SWOT analysis, SWOT was an acronym: strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats. So we were forced to kind of figure it out for various companies or case studies or whatever, right? And so you would use this in maybe a business plan or a marketing plan or something of that sort, or maybe internally just in the business. I used it internally for myself. As soon as I heard that, I was like, how can I use this for myself? What are my strengths? What are my weaknesses? What is that saying? It's know thyself, right? The Oracle.
Mm-hmm. Which is harder than you realize, to be honest.
Yeah, and that's a big thing, being honest with yourself. So be honest with yourself, look in the mirror, figure out what your weaknesses are, figure out what your opportunities are on how you can, strengthen those weaknesses or use your strengths to your advantage. And what are some threats, external threats, if you don't, strengthen those weaknesses, or you let them become exposed, especially if you're going to go start a business for yourself, or launch yourself as a brand online. Maybe it's collegealternative.net.
I don't know. Maybe somebody already took that space over. I don't know. I wouldn't encourage anybody else to try. So,
got it. What other questions do you got? I think I hit.
No, it's good. I kind of wanted to switch it up here a little bit and kind of get into some more of the hard skills that you learned. And I don't know if you learned this in college or where you learned this, but just through books. But financial literacy, and this is a big thing that a lot of parents probably were never taught at a young age through their school, and so they don't know how to pass that on to their kids. The school system certainly doesn't teach anything. I only got taught how to balance a checkbook, and who really carries a checkbook nowadays? What is financial literacy to you, and what are the things that people need to know in grade school or middle school or high school? What do they need to learn?
Yeah, I really wish financial literacy was taught in school. It really isn't. I was probably the same level. I was taught how to balance a checkbook, maybe. And so that really, I'm going to plagiarize something from Robert Kiyosaki. He likes to say, I think it's really good. So he likes to say, a lot of people get a professional education and they rarely get a financial education. Even in people that graduate, a lot of people that graduate from business school will get a professional education in finance, but they still don't have a personal financial education, which is really strange. I guess I like to say there's two things that aren't taught in school: personal finance and relationships. And most people tend to learn them out of habit. And again, if you go back to people, a lot of people like to take the path of least resistance. And if you're learning from somebody who has taken the path of least resistance, you've probably picked up bad habits. Most people, for example, when I was a kid, I thought, just watching old movies and stuff, I thought somebody was wealthy if they had a lot of credit cards. You'd see in the movie somebody open up the wallet, they have a whole bunch of credit cards. Are they able to spend? That's cool.
American Psycho. Yeah.
So I was taught some poor things, or I picked up some bad habits, maybe, or just was never taught maybe the correct way. So I'm a firm believer in Robert Kiyosaki. So I got to do a little hit here. So.
Oh, there we go.
Yeah, one of the top financial books of all time. A lot of people like to knock it. It's different. It's different terminology than what you would learn in maybe an accounting class or something like that. So the book, if you didn't see it, Rich Dad, Poor Dad by Robert Kiyosaki. It's the first book I read. It's probably my first supplement to the cheeseburger. So I think I was a junior in college, and I was on my verge. I got kicked out of school once and got back in. I was on the verge of dropping out of school, and when I picked that book up, I would say that set me for a whirlwind to want to learn, in a whole different way. And it inspired me. And I probably, when you ask how many books did I read in a year, I probably read about 20 books in the next 2 months after that. I just realized I really like learning. I just didn't like the way the school was forcing me to learn and in their ways. So I had a different curriculum set up for myself that was aligning with the path I wanted to go. But there's a lot of different things that are taught there. There's maybe not for everyone, but that particular book really teaches somebody what an asset really is. And again, I'm going to plagiarize some things. An asset is something that puts money in your pocket. A liability is something that takes money from your pocket. So in traditional accounting class, they'll teach you your house is an asset. Well, my personal house, I don't consider it an asset because it takes money from me every month. So to me, it's a big liability. Yeah. Same with my car. And then you'll get people that'll argue, though, you can use your car for other things to help you make more money, which is true. But just if you subscribe to the idea of his terminology, I really dove head first, and it's made a world of difference in my life. I was taught in the school system the accounting terms. This is an asset, this is an asset, this is an asset. But he really breaks it down. It's very simple. I would say sometimes it's more of a motivational book than it is a technical book. Mm-hmm. But there's more places, if it inspires you to go find more technical books, it still did its job. And same with something like this podcast. If it inspires you to, seek out other information, then it's probably doing its job. So I read The Rich Dad Poor Dad. There's another one right after Cash Flow Quadrant. I've basically read all of his books. Cash Flow Quadrant really helps a person identify which quadrant they are. And they're basically 4 quadrants. You got an employee quadrant, self-employed, the investor quadrant, or a big business quadrant, and the investor quadrant. So you got those 4. And most people, if they're in school, they're trained to be into the E quadrant. The whole Pavlov thing, they're trained to go work for a paycheck, so they're in that E quadrant. And you listen to the terminology that people use in those quadrants versus other quadrants. I'm not saying any is better than the other, but if your path is different from that, you may want to look at changing some things in your terminology, in your vocabulary that you picked up out of habit, because the words you say is what you become. And as you read some of these different things, you'll start to become something different without even realizing it. It'll just slowly happen over time. And so I realized I was calling certain things assets, and they were really eating away at me and keeping me from achieving some goals that I had. And once I made the switch in my mind, hey, this is a real asset, or this is a true asset, it's really benefiting me. Again, it made a world of difference. So just the impact of words and other statements. Trying to think of some more, so I hear some people say hey, this is really risky, and again, it kind of depends on their level of education. I'm not talking whether it was college or not just type of education they have, if they had a financial education or not. Risk to me is only relative to the amount of education you've had in that subject. For example, some people might say it's super risky to clear bombs on the road in Afghanistan, right? Well, there's certain ways to mitigate those risks, and there's certain things you can learn to mitigate those risks, in my belief. And the more you learn, the less risky it becomes. But yes, of course, if you take somebody and they've never been trained and you throw them into Afghanistan and clear that roadway, they're probably going to get blown up. Same thing happens with...
That's good advice. That's good advice.
It's the same thing, though. The parallel with that is credit and debt. So I wasn't trained with credit or debt when I was in college, and I used it to my disadvantage. It was really risky for me to be having credit cards in the first place because I was using it to buy things that would just really depreciate in value. They would cause me more expenses every month, so I was just in this negative spiral that I could never get out of.
Yeah, I see that all the time. I see that all the time with my employment. A guy will get a nice new lifted truck.
Yeah.
And then the next guy, will get one, and I'm like, what are you doing? that's debt you probably don't want to have.
And for some people having some of those possessions, it's okay. I'm against it in the most part, but nobody has to be extremely militant and never, enjoy anything in life. But yeah, that typically happens. Somebody might get a bonus at work, or they might get a paycheck and they're like, oh, I got to go buy this now. And they'll go buy a depreciating asset on payments. So I really like to ask people this question too. As I'm sitting here and you're looking at me on the screen or whatever, does it make sense to you? Does it make rational sense to go buy a depreciating asset and put the balance on a credit card at 18% interest? There's hardly anybody in their right mind that would say yes, but yet people still do it. And the reason being is people make purchases with emotions, not rationality. And the marketers that are out there in those school systems learning marketing classes, and the real good salespeople, they know how to tune into your emotions. They know how to get you to impulse buy. They know, they've taken buyer behavior courses like I have. So they can figure out how to kind of manipulate your thinking based on your feelings, and you end up purchasing something. And rather than like being down on yourself or having buyer's remorse or going to return the product, most people will then justify it with rationalization, like, oh no, I really did need this thing, but most cases, most people don't. So it's interesting to watch.
Which my wife and I have talked about this subject. College degrees is one of those.
Yeah, I mean, do you really need it? Yeah, I guess you could try to rationalize that. That's a huge purchase. And then, that would be a bad one to do on emotions and then try to justify it when you're staring at a big.
But we definitely see a lot of people who, I asked to get on interviews and like, oh no, I needed my college. Well, did you really need that college to get that certain job that you're currently in? Well, no, but they're rationalizing it in their mind. And it's very, very interesting to see that human side of rationalization come into play there. So
yeah, absolutely. I see it all the time. With people buying things. It's hard to break certain habits. Even in the fitness industry, we would find that it would take 21 days to form a habit, and people that had really have long-term habits ingrained, it might even take longer to break some of those. So when it comes to spending, again, know thyself, right? Be disciplined. Really try to figure out what your weaknesses are. If spending is a weakness and you're trying to launch your own business, let's say, again, you want to try to start a plumbing business, or you want to try to launch your own app, whatever, doesn't matter where it is on the spectrum. If you can't control your own emotions, it's going to be very, very difficult to be in business. I had an advantage because of my military training, mainly because of the deployments, that a lot of my emotions were, suppressed in certain ways, which gave me probably a little bit of an unfair advantage in business. But you could learn that in other ways. Just learn in everyday events how to control your emotions, because when it comes to like money and investing, there really is no emotion. But you see it every day in the stock market. What drives the stock market, for example? Fear and greed, right? It's two emotions that drive it. And I like to tell people when it comes to like stock market investing, that there's two things that you can get. Price is what you pay, value is what you get. And that's why you'll see like the stock price, right? That's what people are willing to pay. It doesn't mean that that's what it's worth. And that's why somebody like Warren Buffett is extremely successful, because he controls his emotions. And he doesn't look at the name of the company so much, or the stock price right away. What he'll do is generally he will work the numbers backwards on a discounted cash flow method, he calls it. And he determines what the price of the company is before looking at the stock price. So he doesn't let the stock price influence him. And if it's under, or if the stock price is way below the intrinsic value, then he will purchase because he knows he's getting the value. And eventually the market will realize, hey, it was really worth that much. I do the same thing in real estate. I try to find properties undervalued. People that are looking to get into businesses, or maybe they want to buy businesses, private businesses. That's another thing they could try. But just even negotiating, again, if you're a plumber or you're a construction guy, negotiating different things. Know your own value and know what price people are willing to pay, what the market is willing to pay. Mm-hmm. And I'm not saying take advantage of people or anything like that, but don't get taken advantage of yourself, basically.
Yeah, I mean, I'm assuming you have walked into banks and have asked for loans, but I'm assuming you've been the smartest person in that office space in that particular subject and topic when you have asked for that loan. You've educated yourself to that point.
I've been on both sides. I've been doing it long enough where I've been on both sides.
Oh, okay. Well, initially, then.
Well, initially, I had to go through my own learning curve. And, I always say to people nowadays, be fearful, or not necessarily fearful, just be leery of people who work on commission, because they may not always have your best interest in mind. So even if you're a person that's just going to buy a single family home and you're not getting into real estate, but it's just, your first home purchase, think about that person sitting behind the desk. They've did this transaction multiple times, most likely. And most people will only buy a house once, maybe twice in their lifetime. So they're at a huge disadvantage when it comes to the knowledge that enters that room. And when knowledge and money enter a room, usually the person with the knowledge leaves with the money. And so it's good that the government, I guess, comes and puts in certain measures of safety to deny, some people in that position from taking advantage of other people. But increasing your basic financial knowledge can, even if you're not starting a business, can help you in that area, buying your own house or investing. Some people may choose to go get a financial advisor. That's okay. Personally, I don't, but if somebody wanted to, the more you know, the less likely somebody else can take advantage of you or tell you things that just go right over your head, So,
mm-hmm. Yeah, you don't want to be in that situation.
Yeah, and so negotiating deals now, and again, the best, being with a little bit of a sales background, I believe the best negotiating power is the ability to walk away and mean it. And so I think when I first started real estate investing, I would just try to buy the first things I saw and just try to get the first loans I could get. And nowadays it's a lot different story. I shop them around a lot more. I'm sifting constantly. The last single family home flip I even did, I sifted for it for 2 years before I found the deal that I wanted, but it had a 50% return on it. So those returns are very difficult to get for the average person, but when you increase your knowledge, those returns aren't necessarily that far-fetched. So most people are taught, a lot of times it's in that E quadrant again, they're taught, put your money in a savings account or buy a CD or maybe even something like a mutual fund. And the returns are pretty average just like the cheeseburger. So if you want better than the cheeseburger, all I'm saying is you got to supplement it with knowledge and you can get it.
Mm-hmm. You got to take some risk, but knowledge is going to limit that risk.
But again, going back to that risk, if you increase your knowledge, the risk goes down. So a lot of the things I do don't seem risky. They're probably less risky than what most people are doing. It's just because I've increased my knowledge for a number of years now. But that's not me tooting my own horn. That's me just sharing it. I really think some people watching this video, with the amount of knowledge and stuff that's available now on the internet, they can really condense it down and do it even way faster than I did. So,
yeah. So why isn't any of this taught in schools? Why do you think, balancing checkbook is literally the only thing? Why aren't they literally saying, go and read this Rich Dad Poor Dad? Yeah.
I'm going to hold this up. This is one of my favorite authors too. I would say Robert Kiyosaki is my favorite author. Rich Dad Poor Dad, Cash Flow Quadrant. All down the line of his books. But this book inspired me too to really question school. Like, why wasn't I doing so well in school? I don't want to be labeled dumb. Nobody wants to be labeled dumb, and nobody wants that stigma for the rest of their life. One thing Robert Kiyosaki likes to say is, like, my banker has never asked me for my report card. My report card is my financial statements. And when it comes to the world of business and real estate investing, particularly financial statements, if you're trying to get a loan from somebody, they're not going to ask you, oh, what kind of grades did you get in college, or what did you get in high school? It's really not, I don't want to say meaningless, but they don't mean anything in that world. So I wanted to really understand the school system. So again, be challenging, question things. So why was our school system invented? I asked you that question. If it didn't exist, would you invent it? Well, it depends on where you are, probably in the social classes at the time. If you were a really wealthy person and you controlled a lot of the industry or businesses in the world, you might want to create a school system like we got, because it becomes a way to train people and give them an education to make them very knowledgeable in a specific pigeonholed subject. And then they become very well trained and very well disciplined to listen to somebody, and they make it to school on time each day. And sometimes even people get rewarded for attendance and things like that. So just think about you might really like learning a subject like math, for example, and all of a sudden that bell rings and they say, no, you can't learn this anymore, and you got to be pushed over to the next subject. And it really reminded me to similar things in the military, where they compartmentalize you, so you can never really see the bigger picture. Your individual mission, you rarely even know what the unit next to you is doing. Maybe bits and pieces of it, but there's somebody else that knows the bigger piece of the puzzle. So I'm like, in my world, I thought, well, who knows this bigger piece of the puzzle? Who created this school system? Why did they create it? I don't want to give away all the answers on that. There's some really great books out there. And maybe you would get inspired like me after you started to read one. If you're looking for a real easy read, the author is John Taylor Gatto. It's called Dumbing Us Down. And it's, as you can see, a pretty thin book. And pretty inspiring. He was a teacher himself, so coming from his perspective was super interesting. So he's got Dumbing Us Down, A Different Kind of Teacher is another one of his books. And the first one I held up, that bigger one, that big thick one, The Underground History of American Education. So I guess in a nutshell, his philosophy was the idea behind the school system originated from the same system that trained slaves and soldiers. And so since I've been through basic training, I can relate the school training, like I mentioned at the beginning, to basic training. They're both training programs that want you to use what you learn in a specific way. So I'm not saying the education portion is bad at all. The education portion is great. It's just a matter of how do you want to use it. Again, if pursuing the GPA really makes a lot of sense to you, if getting a job and having that security really makes a lot of sense to you, or seeking security really makes a lot of sense to you, perfect. If not, you might want to start questioning and challenging, why do I have the education I do, or why do I feel compelled to use it this way? Is there different ways I could use it? And if so, where are some, different resources to find, to read about on how to use it differently? Maybe some mentors, podcasts like this, different resources that can inspire me to maybe even do it on my own.
So how do you go from, let's say parents are inspired and they go read all these books and they go read the Kawasaki book there and, Rich Dad, Poor Dad. How do they get it's one thing to read it, but it's another thing to actually implement that.
Excellent.
Yeah, exactly. So how do they do that themselves, and how do they get their kids to, what's the next step beyond just reading?
I got to put a plug in for the military. I'm not completely pro-military. There's some things I disliked about it, but I would say sometimes in college I was a daydreamer, and I could come up with ideas all the time, and people would say, well, ideas are a dime a dozen, It's another thing in a business to be able to execute, or even as an individual to execute. And so one of the advantages, again, that I had being in the military was that I stayed on the enlisted side, which meant the private through the sergeant ranks, basically. So the orders would come.
You worked for a living.
I worked.
Yeah.
So maybe you get the orders from the officers, or they come trickling down, and then they would be kind of basically turned over to the enlisted side to execute. So I think that's an important thing. You can't just read something, because then you're just doing the same thing as sitting in a desk at school. You're just reading and learning about it in theory. You have to get out and apply. You have to be willing to go take that risk. You have to get outside of your comfort zone. Those are all important things. For each person, that's going to be unique and individual. It's no different than probably learning a bike. You just got to get on it and take action. I think, or starting a fitness program. I really like to compare personal fitness and personal finance is very, very similar. And for some people, just doing some push-ups first day or just trying something, it's taking action. You're not going to see results right away, but you're going to get some feedback from your own body from doing a few push-ups. Maybe you do too many and you're like, oh, I'm really sore, I want to quit this. Well, again, like I said, it's not a failure unless you quit. So as long as you're not quitting and you keep getting up and trying different things and finding out what works for you, that's kind of my recipe for success. And I think a lot of other people would say the same thing. But I don't have an exact answer for a direct path. If you're interested in real estate, I can share some specific examples, like, hey, I want to buy a house or want to get into real estate investing. What do I do? First and foremost, the education is extremely important. The more you can up that, the better. But you can just go start looking at the basic stuff like your MLS, the multiple listing service, and just started getting real world information on prices and stuff like that. Again, the MLS to me is a very cheeseburger approach. You're going to get the retail.
What is MLS, just for everybody?
Oh, multiple listing service where all the realtors will be listing all their shared information.
Okay.
So I call that the retail outlet. So basically, again, price is what you pay, value is what you get. You're going to pay generally the market prices on MLS. And you'll hear the real estate agents say that this is what the market bears. Well, as an investor, you want to beat those returns, so you got to increase your knowledge. You got to figure out other sources to go to, and other sources you could go to is directly to banks, to their asset managers. You can go directly to auctions. Auction.com is not a bad one. Fannie Mae website is not a bad one. Freddie Mac used to have some stuff. So I'd go straight to the wholesaler instead when it came to single family homes. So that's an example in real estate, I guess. For other trades, maybe you just got to get out and do an apprenticeship and just try to put it in action. Get out there and see if it works for you. Swing some hammers, see if it works for you. I don't know. I did my first flip without any knowledge. I was really green behind the ears. I got in and did all the work. Yeah, it's a funny story. I got to share it. It's a funny story. It was a meth lab that.
Did you know it at the time?
Yeah, it had previously been a meth lab, and somebody else tried to fix it up, and it. Prior to them fixing it up, the meth lab caught fire and burned up the kitchen, whatever. Some other person came in and tried to flip it, and they must have ran out of money, and they got foreclosed on. Now the bank owned it, and it was a rural property, and not only was this place now sitting through the winter, since it was a rural property, they pulled the LP tank, which for the propane for the heat. So now I had no heat, so all the water lines froze up, and they had burst, water flooded the basement, mold all over the basement. And I have a funny story. I was actually deployed when we were looking at buying it, and my dad had sent me the information. He's like, "What do you think?" I think it's a really great deal. I hadn't seen it yet. And I came home from that deployment and saw it. I remember telling my dad, hey, your idea of a great deal, my idea of a great deal are two different things, But ultimately, we ended up making it into a good deal. Without getting into too much of the detail, I think we must have bought it for around $58,000 or something. We sold it for around $175,000. So it sounds like one of those HGTV, flip that house things. Sounds really easy, right?
Yeah.
And that was probably my knowledge level. A lot of my knowledge level through experience was watching HGTV and seeing all these successful people. But I had been reading the books. But I didn't have much construction knowledge, so I started just phoning up contractors, and I went through a heck of an experience. I jumped into it head first. We ended up having to, excavate the place, put in a new membrane around the house, drain tile, and I never had hung drywall before. I'm hanging drywall with the contractors. I said, I want to learn every aspect. I wanted to be the sponge, I'm helping put in plumbing. I'm breaking up concrete, putting in the drain pipes and the packs. And not that I wanted to be on the labor side of it long term, but I wanted to learn every aspect I could about real estate. So no matter what business you're in, I think that's an important thing. There's maybe faster ways to do it. That was just one of the ways I wanted to do it. Again, now I still work with contractors on a regular basis, and now when they give me bids, they can't pull the wool over my eyes. It's just like learning enough about accounting, how to work the numbers, whatever. You know that an accountant or a financial advisor or somebody isn't pulling the wool over your eyes, because you have enough general knowledge at least to be able to speak the same language as them. And I think that's vital. But yeah, that flip ended up working out well. It was a lot of stress, but I learned a ton from it. It was my first real flip. I had bought a couple houses before that at least, so it wasn't totally jumping in head first, but I didn't have anything to that extent as far as the amount of work involved and the learning curve. So again, just taking action. I mean, I wasn't like jumping in head first where it would have completely sank me necessarily. It was a riskier. I was outside my comfort zone for sure, but I guess I wouldn't recommend somebody necessarily jump in head first with their very first investment that way, and they know nothing at all. You could get burned that way. But just take calculated risk. Pace yourself with your knowledge level, and just always try to keep pushing yourself just outside your knowledge level, but not so much where you
can't
completely sink yourself. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. Well, two questions off of that then. Does HGTV give people kind of a false sense? And two, was that first home before or after the housing bubble situation that everybody's kind of,
I would say yes. There's a lot of different programs on, maybe not just HGTV, but some of those programs that, edit out maybe a lot of the bad stuff that can go wrong. They seem to be kind of the same thing every time now, where like, the contractor comes over and they're like, it's going to be this much. And then they open up a wall and they're like, oh man, this is a major structural change. and it's going way over budget. You got to, so it happens in the real world too. But again, the more you understand that, the more you could avoid that kind of thing. Or if you don't want to learn all that stuff, the other way might be to just partner with somebody. Again, you can collaborate in the real world, right? So partner with somebody that is a contractor already. Maybe you got a friend that is. I know some friends like that are, maybe they're in the contracting world and they like to partner with electrician type person that's already got that license under their belt or whatever, So you can find different people to partner with. Let's see, second part of your question was, where was that in the timing of the mortgage meltdown? I definitely tried to capitalize, since we have capitalism in the U.S., I tried to capitalize on the mortgage meltdown. I never tried to capitalize on any individual. There's certain tactics out there taught. I call it more like scavenger investing, and I don't do that. I don't mind if a bank loses money or if they own the homes. I don't mind. I didn't mind and still don't mind if they lose money. But I think the first house I bought was in 2004, and that was for my own personal residence. And I really hadn't learned anything. That's when I first started reading Rich Dad Poor Dad, by the way. It was about 2004, I think. 2006, I think, was my first deployment. And when I came home, it was a forced discipline, kind of situation where I didn't spend a lot of money. So I saved up a lot of money. Again, trying to understand myself, be disciplined. I knew what my end goal was. I didn't want to go buy necessarily the motorcycle or the brand new pickup. However, I did buy a Jeep, and I really like Jeeps, so I bought a Jeep. So I got to call myself out there. But the Jeep lasted about 3 months, and I had buyer's remorse and realized, I'm not pursuing my goals. This Jeep is really fun, but my real goal is to be in real estate. So what am I doing? So I sold the Jeep and used that as my down payment for the next property, which I got a duplex. And so that was about 2007. 2008, I'd bought another house. And so just like reading books, my goal was almost kind of like buy one house a month, or not one house a year. And the more my knowledge increased, the faster I started buying. So not only was my risk going down, my desire to leverage, my desire to understand leverage, borrowing, and being able to get loans became better and better and better. as my knowledge increased, with the meth lab flip, I like to call it, now I was able to go after a lot of these distressed properties and not even be scared. I could understand how much is it going to cost to fix this thing up, so I wouldn't overpay on the price. I knew the value I was getting before I even entered a price or how I would negotiate a price. And I would come in and make pretty lowball offers. And you can't just do that on any old MLS listing, for example. Like I mentioned earlier, you have to find the wholesale deals, go to where the properties are distressed in that particular case. So the deals were already baked in for me. And I think Robert Kiyosaki is the one who says it. He says you make your money when you buy, you realize it when you sell. So every one of those cases, then I knew I'd already made money. It was just a matter of holding the property, seasoning it until a bank would let me refinance out of it, and then I'd pull the equity out, and then I'd just keep snowballing it, roll it. And so some people say you need a lot of money to make money, and in some cases it's true, but it's not true in all cases, especially with real estate, because you can borrow so much. And for some people, certain business, you definitely got to buckle down and bootstrap things and try to convince your family, friends, or fools, they like to say the 3 Fs or whatever, to maybe invest with you. But again, if that's the case, then you need good sales skills. You need to be able to sell yourself. For me, I needed to increase my knowledge, be disciplined, and save a little bit up and borrow the majority until I could, start snowballing the equity. And I accelerated that equity faster and faster. And now I work with a different mentor. He kind of took me under his wing with the multifamily stuff, and we've really accelerated multifamily now. His name is Mike Marcial. He took me to a whole different level of, using, raising money in different ways, looking at things from a different big picture perspective rather than maybe being caught in the weeds. It's also one of the reasons I don't really get involved in a lot of the, day-to-day details of plumbing or construction anymore. But having that knowledge is still an asset, in my opinion. So.
You still have that knowledge that can never go away.
Exactly. I like to tell people I don't have a lot of fancy things. We're in my house right now. This is my kitchen behind me, this board. I don't have a lot of fancy things in my house. I got a nicer house now, I guess, but I got a lot of books on the shelves. So I think I also plagiarized this from Robert Kiyosaki. Like, some people are like, well, you left your door open or whatever. How can, somebody's going to come over and steal something? I'm like, I don't really have a lot to steal because I don't have a lot of, consumer debt assets. But I have a lot of books. If they really wanted to steal something, they'd be smart and steal the books because they could get everything I got if they just read the books, and applied it.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah. Well, and it's also interesting listening to you. Because people might with limited knowledge, they might be a little intimidated because you're talking equity, you're talking leverage, you're talking a lot of different business terms. But I'm assuming you probably didn't know that right off the bat, a lot of this stuff, and were comfortable with all that knowledge right off the bat. I mean, we're talking to you years down the road after you had developed all this knowledge out. And so,
Yeah, if I'm talking too fast for anybody, I apologize for that. But you're absolutely right. I said that at the beginning to him. I'm just an average Joe. Grew up in a small town in Minnesota. I don't consider myself, even though I break apart the two, being knowledgeable and being smart is two different things. I don't really claim myself to be super smart or anything like that, or even necessarily smart at all. It's just I've had the discipline to apply myself.
But you can get that way. I mean, you've taken that path. Other people can, and they can acquire the knowledge.
I dropped out of my first accounting class. I was so far behind I didn't understand. And the next time I took it, I had to retake it. I didn't do so hot in that one either. I luckily had assistance from another person, and she was able to help me pass with a B. I actually got a B in one class. But when I took the second level of accounting, I struggled. I avoided one of the harder classes and took it at a different location so I could pass it easier. I took that path of least resistance. I was intimidated by some of the terms as well. But again, when I picked up Rich Dad Poor Dad, I realized, I I wasn't trying to be an accountant anyway. I just wanted to understand the personal finances and how they applied to me. And the way he explained the terminology, I guess you could say it kind of dumbed it down for me or whatever, but it also inspired me. And it gave me a different desire to learn about those terms. I'm like, oh, this is how it can work for me. It's not just some boring terms now. So I promote that book quite a bit, but that book may not be for you. So it may come from a different source. Maybe it is a group function thing or some club, or maybe it, I don't know. Actually, Robert Kiyosaki also has a board game called Cash Flow.
I've seen
So
that.
I have two. I have two of them at my house here. So for some people, I had some people at my house the other night, and we had a bunch of people getting together and playing. Now you're playing a game, so it makes it more fun. Most people like to play games, but it's interesting that while you're playing a game, you're learning. And a lot of people brought different situations to the table. Maybe somebody was going to start a business or thought about starting a business. Another person was thinking about buying a fourplex. Another person was thinking about, how do I buy one unit? Another person was like curious about getting started in investing, because most people may not even know how to get started in investing in the stock market, for example, or the only thing they've ever been taught is, they may not even know the difference between like a 401k, an IRA, Roth IRA, traditional IRA, all those things, right?
Yeah, which doesn't get taught in schools either.
I never used to know any of that. My only basic teaching was when my mom had me work in that factory. They offered a 401k through the work, so I just had them take the money out of my paycheck, and I elected for it. And I was like, this is investing to me.
Yeah.
It really wasn't investing because it was super passive. And for me, I wanted to become very active with it. So now I run all my own retirement accounts, buy my own stocks. I research all the stocks just as I would evaluate a property or a private business or anything. I evaluate what I think that stock or company is worth and figure out its true value, and then that's the price I'm willing to pay. And if it's undervalued, then I know I'm making money before I even buy it. So that, going back to what you said, don't be intimidated by it. You can always learn over time. I'm still learning. So there's still some things I don't understand. I like to use Investopedia. It's a good website. They have a lot of great videos. So if you don't understand something like levered free cash flow, if that name just over your head, start with like learning about the basic financial statements. So you got 3 basic financial statements. You have your income statement, you have your balance sheet, and you have your cash flow statement. And even if you just learn about one of them starting to get going, the cool thing is you can learn how those apply to yourself. And I think you had I know you'd sent me a question about what I thought the difference was between
business and personal. Yeah.
Business and personal. They can go hand in hand. I think the biggest difference in people's personal lives is going back to that emotional purchase stuff. Businesses generally don't purchase things too much with emotion. Most of the time it's rationally purchased. Or there's certain protocols, or there's certain, the CFO of the company or whoever that might, if it's a bigger company, might have a lot of protocols in place on how they do things and all these ratios and how they're tracking every little single thing. So most individuals don't have that, but they do have emotions. So they go and spend maybe on things they don't buy. I like that saying from Fight Club: people buy things they don't need with money they don't have to impress people they don't like, right? So from that aspect, they're completely different because there's way more emotion involved. But from the aspect of what I learned in just, struggling with accounting, after I read the Rich Dad Poor Dad, when I went to more business classes or whatever, I really looked, how does this apply to me? How can I extract this out, and how does it fit in my personal world? How can I make this fit with my personal finances? And so an income statement from a company isn't that much different. It's much easier for an individual because you probably have a lot less things going on, but it's the same concept. Same thing with a balance sheet. And if you're trying to figure out what the owner's equity There's another term for you. Owner's equity in a business is basically the same terminology as what is somebody's net worth. You're taking your assets that you have. Like, for example, so if you have a car, in my opinion, not a true asset, but you've got it in your asset column, and let's say you paid $20,000 for it. Price is what you pay, value is what you get. As soon as you drive it off the lot, maybe now it's worth $18,000, so you got a poor value. You paid $20,000 for it. Maybe you put a little bit of money down, so you got a loan on it for $18,000, and so your technical equity in it would be $2,000, right? The difference of those two. But I think learning those things and putting that together and tracking it and being consciously aware of it. If you're a religious person and you like to go to church or a mosque or whatever religion you are, people that are religious, and people throw that religious term, they do things religiously, right? So you do it religiously to remember why you do it, to keep it consciously aware of that, whatever it is. Same with fitness, or if you're tracking your diet, the successful people will track it, right? You'll see them with a little book or maybe an app, and they track their workouts, or they're tracking their calories, or they're tracking their steps with like a Fitbit or whatever. I don't use those things, but whatever they are, being consciously aware of where you're going or where you are currently and where you're going is extremely important. If you can't identify where you are at currently, you're kind of in trouble. That would be one of the first steps I would do. Like, what is your current financial situation? What is your current strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, threats? Really sitting down and who you are, and then trying to look on that same road or that map and figure out, this is where I want to be. Now, some things might start to come clear, at least in a few different ways on how to get there. Now it's up to you to take action. So for me, I like to track my personal financial statements monthly, just because I'm a little bit more militant about it than most people. But even if you did it quarterly, once a year, whatever, but at least you're consciously aware of where you're at and how you're changing. For example, I remember when I first started working out, I was a really skinny, scrawny beanpole, and I was super intimidated about going into the gym. I remember buying a set of weights and investing in my education. I bought a Joe Weider book, Joe Weider, however you want to pronounce, the guy who trained basically Arnold Schwarzenegger. And I wanted to learn everything about working out, but I had to start somewhere. And I just remember just being really super scrawny, and I could barely lift anything or anything like that. But the more I increased my knowledge, and the more I just kept applying myself, and the more I tracked it, the better I became. If I would have just jumped head first into going to a gym, I probably would have been super intimidated and been really turned off, because I would have started comparing myself to others right off the bat. And I would have realized, it probably would have felt like I wasn't making any progress. But I was able to go back to those pages when I was writing down each workout in a book and realize, oh, I did more push-ups this day, or I did more, weight in the squats, or whatever it might have been. The same thing with finances. I track my balance sheet to see how I'm improving. I keep myself in check and keep certain disciplines of like, am I buying true assets or am I buying liability? What did I spend money on last month? If you look at your checkbook or your checking account and all your money's being spent at the bar, you might not be looking at achieving your goals too easily. And for some people it's great. You got to go celebrate too. So I'm not knocking going to the bar or something. But just know where you are. Figure that out, figure out where you want to get to. And the military has something similar to that. And they like, well, here's our mission, here's where we want to get to, right? And then they back plan from that all the way to the beginning. So you could instill back planning in your life. Now, I have another analogy that goes along with that. So it's on my board. You probably can't see it.
Hey, there we go.
It's this little rocket here, and basically the rocket is people's ideas. And again, if your idea is to start your own plumbing business, if your idea is to start your own construction business, if your idea is to launch an app, if your idea is to get into real estate, you got to start somewhere. And for some people, they think just writing the business plan is the thing, and they get so caught up in analysis paralysis, and they teach you writing plans in school. I wrote so many plans in school, I hated it. That was another thing I really hated, because I was always writing plans and they were always in theory. We never executed on them. So plans are good, don't get me wrong, but it comes down to execution. Again, ideas are a dime a dozen. Learning how to take action and execute and not be afraid of failure. I think sometimes in the school system, like I said, you're trained not to make mistakes, so it's hard to break those habits. You also have different things that are in the outside market. What are some outside threats? So if you're doing your own internal SWOT analysis, what are some of your own threats? Do you get, people like to throw around that term butt hurt, right? Do you get butt hurt easily? Do you need to work on getting a little thicker skin? So here's an example. I have this rocket that launches off from Earth, and that's like your idea. And your different sets of fuel cells for this thing, or thrusters, would be like your passion, your motivation, and your desire is helping you launch this thing. You have to have a decent idea, though, and logical and rational idea, but it's fueled by emotions. And as you're trying to make it through these different layers of the atmosphere, I like to call them, it's kind of interesting, because one of the first layers of the atmosphere is the coldest layer it can be. And sometimes the coldest layer is your warm market. It's your own family, it's your own friends telling you can't do it. And belief, to me, this kind of goes back to religion too. I'm not knocking it, but belief in itself is a powerful thing. It doesn't necessarily mean it's true. But if you allow it to be true, it can come to fruition in your life. So if you believe you're going to fail, it's probably true. So if you can just get away from some of your old beliefs and look at what beliefs are limiting you in your life right now, some of the things you've been taught that you need to unlearn, maybe some of those things were in school, maybe they were from your own family. What are some things you were taught about money that you don't understand or that scare you? What are some things, for example, if you invest money, does that make you an evil person? Is that a belief you have in your life, if somebody in your family tried a business and they failed, and then that's all you know, you go down that path, all it is failure. I would say also, when you're looking for mentors or alternative paths, don't listen to the naysayers. Don't worry about that first atmosphere. Only seek out people that are successful. And again, this program, if you're interviewing those types of people, you're going to find a lot of people that are successful. You're going to hear more and more stories. I'm like, hey, this could really happen for me. You don't have to just sit and believe the lemmings, I like to call it. But one of the things is, as the layers of the atmosphere get harder and harder and harder, you have different things like lack of money that might keep you down. You might have something else you're lacking in your knowledge. And at the end of the day, what I like to say is, going back to that, where you got to hate something bad enough. That's the analogy I like to use. Is there's a hate fuel that you put in there as like your turbo thrusters in this rocket. For me, I hated being an employee so much, again, that I was willing to put in the time. Vince Lombardi used to say with the Packers, you have to have the will to win to really win. And that meant you have to be willing to practice really hard, harder than other people. So in your case, you got to defeat your own enemy in your own head. Your own head is probably telling you, take that path of least resistance. And you got to just say, hey, shut up, boys. My hate fuel, I hate being where I'm at right now. I want to get to that other place on the map. And I'm going to bust through these layers of the atmosphere. And the way to do that is to increase my knowledge in those areas I'm lacking, or team up with somebody that I'm lacking with. Nowadays on real estate deals, we team up with a variety of different people. I don't do it all myself. I don't try to wear every single hat myself. Some people may do that from the beginning like I did, and they may have to go through some of those adversities and challenges and extra stresses and extra time. They may have to give up their weekends. And ultimately, they need to determine, is it worth it for them? You're going to have a lot of voices in your head probably saying, this isn't worth it. I want to go hang out with my friends or my peer group. Yeah. But it really comes down to that desire. So if one of those engines on that rocket is desire and you really want to get there, you won't be so concerned with that. You'll know that each time you put in more, you're not only investing in yourself. Even if you fail, you're investing something in yourself. I forgot to mention I did have a failed business right out of school, and it was for a hockey device we were trying to create, and it was for a training device, and we were trying to prove that it wasn't just visual, or it wasn't just speed or strength or something like that really separated the great athletes from the good ones. We wanted to prove something in the realm of visual awareness. Ultimately, the business failed, but I like to say I didn't fail because I didn't give up. I didn't quit.
Yeah.
I learned a ton from it. And you hear a lot of entrepreneurs say, I learned from that. So I remember sitting on the flip side, listening to people like, yeah, but how did you rebound? And at the time, my entire net worth, when I launched that business, I would say it was probably $6,000, and I put it all into the business. I lost it all. To me, that was a ton of money. It was a lot of money. And the experience, so I look back, is like, how much did I spend on school? I just got one of the best educations I ever could have received. I had to raise a lot of the capital. I had to write the business plan, work with the teamwork, help get engineers on board, help with somebody in the fitness industry, have this glue of putting all these people together. And that was very, very invaluable. And I still look back on it and I'm like, just realize all the lessons I learned from it. And that was a pretty cheap tuition for $6,000.
Yeah, that's true. So, you would suggest surrounding yourself with successful people or people that are like-minded to you. And how do you find those people, especially if you're a teenager?
Yeah, it's going to be tough because you got peer pressure influences. You got stuff on social media nowadays that I never had to deal with, or a lot of people in my age category probably didn't have to deal with. So there's differences nowadays that are harder for me to put myself in those shoes and just throw out advice. But there is the saying, you become the product of the people you
average. You're the average.
People you hang around with, right?
Yeah.
So I guess I was kind of blessed in that I didn't get into the partying crowd or anything in high school or as a teenager. I was pretty highly involved in sports, and so I had some really good goal setting techniques I think I learned from coaches and stuff back then. So in some of my peer groups were also athletes. That helped a lot, just being in a positive mindset. People, even though we weren't working on business stuff or anything like that, it was still moving in a positive direction and trying to achieve positive goals together. If sports or athletics aren't for you still, there's other groups you can get into. I mean, I wasn't talented in music or computers or anything like that. And there's groups out there available for that, especially online now. And so try to surround yourself with positive people in general. You hear about, there's always people that are going to be the negative Nancys or the Debbie Downers, I like to call them, that no matter what happens, they're negative. And we used to have a saying in the one network marketing business that we had a story about the negative Nancy or the negative farmer. No matter what, if it rained, the positive farmer would be like, oh, great, now my crop's going to grow well. The negative farmer would be like, oh, that's going to drown the crops out. We're not going to have nothing. And then, on the flip side, if the sun came out, the positive farmer would be, hey, our crops needed this to dry out and needed to grow, right? And the negative farmer would be like, oh, there's too much sun. It's just going to burn all the crops. We're going to have no yield, So, stay away from the negative people if you can. Don't be a negative person. Again, try to understand yourself. If there's a saying in the game of poker too, if you don't know who the donkey is at the table within the first few minutes, you're probably it. So try to identify if you're the donkey in real life. If you're the negative Nancy, knock it off. Try to figure out how you can change your life around to be positive and have maybe you don't have a lot of education or skills yet because you're young, but how can you still be a happy person and change your attitude to become happy and reflect positivity to people, and people take notice of that. So,
and then you become the influencer of the group.
Yeah. Maybe when you're young, maybe you want to team up with some other younger. Depends on your age. Think about kids that start a lemonade stand together. They're not afraid of failing because they haven't been taught how to fail yet. They haven't been taught the fear of failing.
Until they get shut down by the city council.
And that can happen, but maybe. I see a lot of younger people start lawn mowing business. I see a lot of adults doing it. They're super successful with it. So there's things you can surround yourself with. I don't know much about apps or stuff happening on the internet so much. I'm a big follower of some of the tech companies that do it, but my own personal skills, that's not my realm. Some of these younger kids have those abilities, and maybe you just want to form a little group, and instead of going and doing something negative, you get together and you learn more about that, and who knows where it goes.
Yeah. Do you ever worry about the financial cost of failure at all?
Yes and no. It's changed over time.
Mm-hmm.
Well, I have to go back to that story of the meth lab. I got nervous about that. Some of the stories you see on people, they go bankrupt or something, or go in way over their heads. So that's why I kind of backed off on that when I was telling that story. As long as you're not going too far outside of your comfort zone, I think just outside of the bubble, you kind of have this bubble that might be your comfort zone. If you completely stay in the bubble all the time, there's a saying, the sure thing boat never gets far from the shore. So you have to be able to leave land and go sailing, basically is how the analogy would put it. There's the other analogy of there's no turning back, where the ship sails up and they're going into battle, and the commander of the ship, as they're approaching land and they're getting out, burns the ship behind them. So they don't even think about turning back. They just got to shoot forward, right? To me, it's an interesting story, but maybe even a little bit too extreme for people starting out. I would never want to give advice where somebody falls flat on their face. So as long as you know yourself and you know your own abilities, and you kind of do that SWOT analysis on yourself, you'll be able to determine what am I able to achieve, what's too far out of my comfort zone, and maybe I need to try one step before that. I have a stepping stone before I get to those. I don't worry about the financial cost of failure. I worry more about being stuck in the rat race, or having to be dependent on somebody else. That's more scary to me than taking a risk nowadays, or what some people would consider taking a risk. I like to use another example Robert Kiyosaki uses, was security and freedom. And I have my own personal situations to add to this. So a lot of people think they want to seek security, and school kind of teaches this once again. So it kind of teaches you, don't make mistakes, and you hear maybe people in your family you might have heard them say, better safe than sorry, various things like that detract you from, taking certain risks. And so you get all this knowledge from your education, but then you're only trained to stay secure with it, and maybe just go after that paycheck and never branch out and try something. You're fearful of trying something, and you feel like, I have this security from this employer. And you see it nowadays, a lot of people don't stay at the same job like they used to. So that security is kind of false. It's kind of
it's non-existent nowadays.
Yeah. So security to me, again, going back to vocabulary, the way I would interpret security is a lot different than somebody maybe in that E quadrant. So you have security on one end, freedom on the other. Well, I'll tell you one thing. When I was deployed, I actually had a lot of security. Everything was provided for me by the military. The uniform, the paycheck always came in, no matter whether I was sick, injured, whatever. That's really secure, right? The food was provided for me. I didn't really have to fend for myself. All I really had to do was focus on the mission, right? And not knocking the military, because I respect it. It's just that you have a lot of security there. I think that there's only one level of security beyond that. I would call it maximum security prison. because you get everything provided for you. Your clothing's provided for you, your food's provided for you. You don't have to really do anything but stay in that cell, right? You can't go anywhere. Just like the deployment, I was stuck unless we did a mission. I was stuck only what, the mission allowed. I couldn't go do my own things if I wanted to, and that was not freedom. So it helped, being in that environment helped me desire freedom more. And so as you shift over to the freedom side, things become seemingly more risky because now you have to fend for yourself. So you see that it's interesting too when you watch some people get out of the military that they may have difficulty fending for themselves. And if there was different resources they could reach out to learn how to use those skills in the civilian side, I think they would be much more successful. The other interesting, the flip side of that is you see a lot of people, entrepreneurs lately who started businesses. One of the biggest demographics is veterans because they've been exposed to those risks. So it's kind of a little bit of both there. It's kind of odd. It depends on how you use what you were taught, But yeah, I seek freedom. What scares me more than anything is being secure. I'm secure in a different way. I use the term in a different way. So you look at some of these other countries that don't have freedom. So I'm more scared of not having freedom than I am risking something to take a risk to achieve freedom. And freedom to me nowadays is creating multiple streams of income. So even if I lost my job, I have 2-3 other sources of income coming in, and it wouldn't affect me. And to me, that's real security. Most people, if they lost their job, they'd be lucky to survive a few months. And that's the harsh reality of today's world. And that's why, to me, personal finance is super important for yourself as an individual or in business. And I think, again, Kiyosaki uses it. The real definition of wealth is along those lines. It's not how much money you have in the bank. It's not if you're a millionaire or some multimillionaire. It's if you lost your ability to exchange your time for money. Let's say you got sick or you got put in a full body cast and you can't work for a year. Will you survive? And if you could calculate out how far your passive income or income from your business or income from your investments or income from whatever was happening, income from using your brain in a different way, royalties, whatever, how long would you last? And that to me is my definition of wealth, because now you have time freedom to go spend it, probably with people you care about, things like that.
Yeah, you have that freedom
Mm-hmm.
to do whatever you want.
Yep. So that's when you ask, am I scared of, that was a long answer for if I'm scared of the fear of a financial failure or something like that. No, it can be a small fear, but there's bigger fears out there for me and it easily trumps those. So
yeah, you just need to change your perspective on life.
Yes.
Twist it around and it doesn't look as big as it used to. Yeah.
Yeah, and for some, once you get the knowledge, you'll realize how much of a shift your mind makes and just how obsolete some of the things you may have been taught or just maybe formulated in your own mind to become a belief, and how limiting those beliefs are, how bad those fears are holding you back. And I'm just really glad I picked up the books and started learning, because I had a lot of my own self-limiting beliefs and still do. Nobody's perfect, and I'm still learning. I always keep learning, so.
Nice.
I like to go to things, my friend of mine, he took me to Anthony Robbins down in Los Angeles, and I went to Unleash the Power Within or whatever. And that was interesting. I even learned some things there that I didn't know about myself, and I was like, wow, it was eye-opening. So even when you think you've learned a ton, you still got to keep going back to the mirror and looking at yourself and like, what are my weaknesses, or what weaknesses have I still developed over time? So
yeah, check your ego at the door. That's a big one too. Yeah. It's the guy who talks the most. It's not always the most knowledgeable.
Yeah. Explains it. That's why I'm talking the most, I guess.
Hey, one final question for you here. How can teenagers with limited life experience gain perspective on what actual success is in life in order to decide on long-term goals?
oh, teenagers, how can they gain perspective on success? Success is really, it's open to interpretation what success is, because it may not always be about money. Here I am tracking my balance sheet, each month or whatever. And for me, self-improvement is success. Money is just a measure of it. Money to me is just a tool that can be used for other things. A lot of people use that tool incorrectly. And they try to go buy happiness with it, for example, and they end up buying material possessions. And then they end up realizing, I'm not happy. So they say, money doesn't buy happiness. Well, of course it doesn't, because you're using the tool incorrectly. So success is, it's hard to define, because everybody's going to have maybe a different opinion of it. Even the same person as a teenager over time may have a different definition of what success is over time. To me, success is being able to discipline myself to win my own battles in my head. Sometimes my head will want to tell me to take the easier route. As a teenager, I would say, maybe that easier route was, let's go out partying or something, or let's go do something that isn't necessarily positive, whatever that might be. And having the willpower to overcome that and do something positive instead. I think that's your own, winning each of those little battles helps you win the overall war, right? So I think that's what success is, or can be, for a lot of people. Even today, a mini success for me, I got a crutch. One of my weaknesses is drinking soda. I didn't have a soda today. That was a mini success for me. So not just being able to string that together multiple times in a row. I mean, that's really what it is. Whether it's fitness, again, finance, if you're a teenager, stringing those those little successes together over time. As a teenager too, God, you have so much time ahead of you. You got a lot of opportunities to make mistakes. So many mistakes to make, and so much ability to learn yet. So I think when I was a teenager, I made a lot of mistakes, but I remember getting small jobs. I'd rake lawns, mow lawns, worked at a grocery store, all kinds of different things. It's not where you start, it's kind of where you finish, and just having fun along the way. So, and being happy with yourself about the decisions you make, I guess. There was one other book I didn't mention. I mentioned his name real quick. Dave Ramsey, Financial Peace. I didn't want to leave him out. I really promoted Robert Kiyosaki a lot. They don't always see eye to eye. So if somebody that's maybe in debt right now, and they found themselves in debt, Dave Ramsey offers some good programs for one of them is called Financial Peace, and one of them is called the Debt Snowball. He's got some different terminologies as well on how to just maybe get yourself in the right position before you start making investments. So some people, they may be watching this and be like, there's no way I'm going to be able to invest in real estate. I got $20,000 in credit card debt, all the student loan debt, or whatever. So maybe first and foremost is getting on the track of really getting that destructive debt out of the way. I like to call it that really high interest credit card debt, getting your mind right about not just paying off the debt, but fixing the problem that caused it in the first place, which was controlling the emotions, controlling the impulses of the purchases, things like that. And that goes back to the mini successes for a teenager. If you start young, I probably didn't get serious about it till I was 26, I would say. So, somebody's a teenager, if they're 16, they have a 10-year head start on me. So yeah. I envy that. So, I mean, there's you could do a lot of great things in 10 years. So
yeah, time is, you don't realize until you're old, the time aspect.
And that's one of the reasons I wanted to accelerate my knowledge on just about anything, is because I know my time on earth is finite. Everybody's is, and at least as far as we know right now. And if you can accelerate things faster, even like school, business school, to me, I don't think it necessarily needs to be drawn out so many years. A lot of people go to school 4 to 6 years, whatever, and then graduate with all that debt. I think it would be really cool if you could, I mentioned this before, you condense that down and actually be really impactful and learn it really fast through experience and taking risks and doing them calculated and actually be making investments during that time.
Accelerate that cycle. Yeah.
Yeah. Instead of coming out with the debt, you're coming out with investments producing money. Or I'm not going to promote my own plan yet, but I have some ideas
Stay tuned,
on
folks. Stay tuned. We'll break it here.
Yeah,
first.
I have some ideas on how to help people leverage that maybe. But yeah, any other questions or?
No, that's about it. That's about it. I think you kind of left it as a cliffhanger there. So stay tuned for next time when we have Mike on. He'll be talking about his plan. But I really do appreciate you taking the time to come on and to talk to us.
I'm very happy to contribute. I hope it, even if it impacts one or a couple people, whatever, it's worth it. And I really appreciate what you're doing. And hopefully this thing kicks off, because like I mentioned to you before, I think there's really an unmet need for this, a really big problem. And if one person it impacts, you're doing the right thing. So.
Well, again, thanks, Mike. Do appreciate it, man. And for all you guys out there, big takeaways: start out small, limit risk, learn as much as you can, and surround yourself with good people. Yeah, try to find a mentor out there. All right.
Yeah, definitely.
Okay. Well, again, Mike, thank you very, very much. I do appreciate you taking the time. All right.
Yeah. You.
All right. Have a good evening.
You too.
3 foot tall, like you're 3 foot tall. 3 foot tall.
So, guys, I learned a ton from this episode. I hope you did too. Again, really, it all comes down to taking your education into your own hands, figuring out what you don't know, and coming up with solutions to figure out those problems and make yourself a better person. So Mike did that. You can too. When it comes to financial literacy, he really goes into good detail and good depth on how to expand your knowledge into all this stuff. Until next time, guys, check out collegealternative.net. We've got plenty of more episodes up. We're posting all the time. If you guys have any questions, please comment below. Click that like, click that subscribe. It always helps. And also, talk with your friends. Talk with them about their future plans, what they're planning on doing in their life. And again, college isn't the end goal. Remember, it's just a stepping stone from point A to point B. If you can maybe avoid that, go into various other educational techniques or methodologies to get your education, why not check it out? It doesn't hurt to look. So until next time, guys, later.